When is one time you have felt genuine 100% fear? Story 1. I've had quite a few run-ins with work-related incidents, from rigging failing with a dozen tons of steel overhead to being crushed by a machine with overridden safety interlocks. The ones that really spook me are rotating masses, though. Lathe crashes are just a matter of getting away from the chuck as fast as humanly possible and trying everything to stop the awful booming sounds. Well, if that wasn't enough, I picked up a job doing centrifuge repairs. After the better part of a year, I got tasked with rebuilding a horizontal centrifuge. Imagine a 55-gallon drum made of 1-inch thick steel spinning at 3,500 RPM. And after rebuilding, I started up and it reaches full speed. Then heck breaks loose, and 3 are solid carbide tiles inside this machine, and they all broke off in the span of 2 seconds. The machine starts shaking like mad, and while I wanted to shut it off, I had to run behind the currently runaway machine that could rip itself apart to do so. That moment had me crouching and terrified as I made my way to the disconnect. Story 2. I experienced a heart attack at the age of 21. I thought I'd die during the experience. The pressure and pain in the chest, the numbness of my arms, I puked and everything went dark. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Figures I managed to get my heart infected. Everything was swollen up and I had water in my heart valves. Not native, excuse me if that's wrong. That's what caused it. I was 100% sure I was done shortly before I went out. I also was alone in Chiang Mai, northern Thailand, preparing for a multiple-day jungle trek. I went to my B&B after getting dinner, and a guy pulled me into a small side street and showed me a knife and started to talk in Thai. As I started to unbuckle my backpack, some young guys came into the street and chased the sucker off. They apparently saw what happened. I bought them drinks afterward. David and friend, I am still grateful if you ever read this. That's the second time I nearly got robbed while traveling, but I was alone that time, so it was more terrifying. Story 3. Last winter, I was in the backseat of a truck with my friends. I was in the middle seat, and like an idiot, I didn't use the seatbelts. We were driving on the highway and over a bridge. We hit ice. All of a sudden, we're skidding to the edge of the lane, and I see the 2-foot-tall cement wall on the edge getting closer, and we're about to slam into it. I knew we'd of course break it and go over, and I knew I was going to die. In 0.2 seconds, I thought, this is how I'll die. I wonder if it'll hurt, if I'll die instantly, if I'll bleed out, if my friends will die around me. I knew I was going to die. And then we bounced off the wall, spun, hit it again, spun, and hit it a third time before stopping. The entire thing, from hitting the ice to stopping, took like half a second, but I knew I was going to die. Everyone was okay, surprisingly minimal damage to the truck too. Car accidents are no joke, and I'm glad you all got through that okay. I do hope you start wearing your seatbelt now though. Seatbelt saved my life in a head-on collision when I was maybe 11 or 12. Would have gone through the windshield if not for that thing. Story 4. I was hanging out at night in my fort with my friends in the South Jersey swamp as a young teen. Suddenly the swamp went silent. It never goes silent. At night, it's loud, and only the things in your immediate vicinity shush as you pass. This was complete silence as far as we could hear. In the same instant, we looked at each other and just panicked. We were all filled with a sense of absolute terror. No words were spoken, we all just bolted back to the neighborhood as fast as we could. We never knew what happened. We never felt stupid about it either. We all know something was off, but to this day, over 40 years later, I've never felt fear or panic like that, and have never heard nature so silent again. Hey man, I'm from Central Jersey, and my brother and I used to play in the woods behind our house. If there's one thing that's freaking terrifying as a child/teen, it's knowing that the woods are never silent unless something is wrong. Story 5. I was working out with a personal trainer. Small gym just for this kind of thing, and we were the only two in there. I finished a pretty rough circuit, and he went to the restroom while I recovered. Then I started to feel a tightness in my chest and pain. I started clutching at my chest, thinking, no, not now, not like this is too soon. And then I let out the biggest, most powerful burp I've ever had, and immediately felt fine. I've seen in sitcoms and such where a guy thinks he's having a heart attack and then gets diagnosed with gas, but now I fully understand it. I had a burp like that once. Then when I released it, it took longer than a minute, and then I had another panic moment because I couldn't inhale. I managed to whine help me at my wife before the burp kept going. When it finished, I basically collapsed, gasping for air, and my wife asked me if I just exorcised a demon or some crap. LOL. Heart attack scares are no joke. When I was in my late 20s, I went to the hospital thinking I might be having a heart attack. Turns out I had the worst indigestion of my life, paired with my left arm hurting from carpal tunnel stress, and just a general panic attack to go with it. I went from at home and terrified to feeling like an idiot in a hospital. Story 6. I was bullied really badly for all of 5th and 6th grade, and the teacher was even part of the bullying. My depression drove me to do things I never thought I would have done, and I was glad my parents didn't allow me to carry a crafting knife in my pencil case. But it also caused my grades to slip terribly. The teacher would constantly tell me how everything was my fault, insult me, and he'd always say middle school would be like this, but 10 times worse. I'd always been scared. The day I graduated, I broke down. Everyone was crying a bit because they were sad to leave friends, and they thought I was crying for the same reason, perhaps just more dramatically as I was about to move to another city. But I wasn't. It was the greatest fear I'd ever experienced because I literally thought I would die in middle school. I hope you're okay now. Story 7. Content warning. Descriptions of the threat of S assault. Scroll forward 55 seconds to skip this story. I was trapped in a house with a drunk friend and 2 men who clearly wanted to frick us and were trying their best to make me drink from a probably spiked glass. I was sober that night and could think straight, so I refused anything they were trying to give me, and they looked extremely agitated at my refusal, but I was adamant on not taking any substances. It took me 2 hours to get out of there. When I forced my way out, they all looked at me with a creepiest stare and said, "You go, your friend stays." I can never forget how terrified I was. I later found out from my friend that they had tried their best to touch her and violate her whilst I was trying to figure out how to get us out. I was away from her for 2 minutes. She had gone to the toilet. Just a reminder to the guys out there, it is because of monsters like this that women tend to be a little less trusting and act defensively in many situations, so try to be a little understanding if you're trying to flirt with good intentions. Be careful out there, folks. Story 8. My SO was in kind of a slump emotionally for a bit, and while I was at work, he texted me and seemed pretty down. I asked him what was up, but he didn't respond. I tried calling, but he denied my calls. Then suddenly he just wrote, "I don't feel too good mentally," and just went offline on all platforms at once and shut off his phone. I just slammed my work laptop shut and ran as fast as I could to the subway to get home. When I finally reached the apartment, he wasn't even there. I was so freaked out I was just screaming his name like a madwoman, somehow hoping he'd respond. Everything turned out fine in the end, and he apologized for scaring me, but oh man, I was so sure I was going to be the one to find his body that day. Story 9. I think I've felt that a couple of times so far. Here's one of those occasions. When I was about 10 years old on a normal school day, during the last hour, our teacher gets called outside the classroom by our principal. I remember seeing how worried the principal was. After a couple of minutes, the teacher came back, calmed us down, and told us very calmly, "There is a bomb outside the front door of the school." There was a silent panic that swept across the classroom as she proceeded to tell us all to hide under our desks. We waited for an hour after the army and bomb diffuser team showed up, then one by one the families came and picked up their children. I had to walk home alone. Story 10. Lost control of my car when I was going 80 on the highway. Some guy tried to rapidly merge in between me and the semi-truck in front of me, and I had to make a quick adjustment to keep from hitting him. My car started rapidly swerving as I tried to regain control. At some point I realized I was going to crash and there wasn't much I could do. The thought going through my head was, "Don't hit the semi-truck, don't hit the semi-truck," over and over again. I couldn't stop the crash, but I managed to force my car to swerve into the concrete barrier parallel parking style. No damage to the car, no one else involved. I was unhurt. I consider myself to be very lucky. I tend to be a very careful driver, but I'm also a pretty nervous driver when people are reckless. So if you are a person who recklessly merges in traffic like that person did to the OP, let me just say that I don't much care for you, and I wish you a lifetime of catching your genitals in zippers. Story 11. When I was 10, my mother had a nervous breakdown. She spent the entire night hitting and kicking me while making me tell her I hated her. She took a break to cry in the bathroom, ordered my sibling and I pizza, but the breaks that night were short before it was back to the abuse. Honestly, that was one of the worst nights of my life, and even after years of therapy, I still have nightmares over that. It was seeing her expression change so rapidly that got me, and how quickly she snapped. I'm sorry you experienced that. To have that weird mix of positive, ordering you pizza, and the middle must have been so confusing. I hope you're doing okay now. Story 12. When my son started choking. He was about 9 months old and was eating his standard wheat cereal with milk for breakfast and was happily munching away. Then all of a sudden he just stopped. He went silent, totally silent. There was no air moving. It was freaking terrifying. Luckily, I've had children's first aid training, and that and mom's instinct kicked in. Slapped him hard on the back with his head pointed to the floor with him over my knee. Multiple slaps. A clot of cereal dislodged, and he was able to breathe again. We both collapsed on the floor in tears, had cuddles, and generally recovered. Then he wanted to carry on eating his breakfast. He's a trooper. Story 13. I was on a commercial flight and the pilot came over the tannoy to tell us luck wasn't on our side today and there was an emergency with the flaps and landing gear not working correctly and that we would have to fly around to burn off the fuel. There would be lots of emergency vehicles to meet us when we did land, but not to worry too much as he'd recently done this emergency in the simulator. Passengers were crying and panicking. No one felt reassured. I genuinely thought we were all going to die. Don't worry too much, I've practiced this recently. I can only imagine how calm/nonchalant the pilot sounded whilst announcing this. Yeah, then the intercom turns off and you can hear muffled screams and crying through the door to the cockpit. At least if I was a pilot, that is what you would be hearing. Thankfully, I did not become a pilot. You are all welcome. Story 14. I was in labor with my son and my blood pressure kept bottoming out. First, I lost my vision. It came back. Then I lost my hearing. When I was unable to hear, all of the medical staff in the room suddenly had very concerned looks on their faces and rushed to the monitor tracking my baby's heartbeat. I then started to pass out and I was losing consciousness. I saw a nurse thrust an injection into my leg, but I felt nothing because of the epidural. All of that combined was probably the scariest moment of my life. Both my son and I were okay, and he's a healthy 1-year-old now. Story 15. Received a call from my dad, a voice faint and weak, a few final words telling me to take care of my mother and sister. Then I woke up, heart rate through the roof, some initial stages of hyperventilation, tears rolling down my eyes, and a huge surge of panic and fear. It took me some seconds to realize it was a dream, but it took over a week to get over what I felt. It's good to know I'm not alone because this happened multiple times to me already. I'm really glad all of your loved ones are safe and healthy. It is weird just how intense of an effect dreams can have on us. I suppose I will share my scariest moment because it is dream-related. I don't normally have very realistic feeling dreams, but in this dream, things felt so intensely real and lucid, and I was dying. I could feel myself trapped in my mind, trying to fight to breathe, to keep conscious, but it was fading, and I knew that I was moments from death. It was this bizarre mix of absolutely terrifying and calm acceptance. Then, at the last moment, I breathed in the dream and woke up a moment later in tears. It was just a dream, but that feeling stuck with me, and I was messed up for days. I can still remember how it felt, and it scares the crap out of me. Story 16. The time I got into bed with my girlfriend and immediately started coughing up blood. Ran into the bathroom and held on to the sink for dear life. Every breath I tried to take, I just ended up wheezing more blood out of my lungs. By the time the ambulance got there, I'd pretty much come to terms that this was how I died. Then it slowed down and finally stopped by the time I got to the ER. Long story short, it turned out to be Hodgkin's lymphoma. Had chemo for 6 months and am cured now with minimal repercussions. Scariest time of my life. Story 17. That time when a guy stalked me. I was walking to my brother's house, headphones on, so at first I didn't notice him. He followed me for several minutes, then grabbed my shoulder and started yelling at me like a dang possessed. He was yelling that I was a W, that people like me should die, and things like that. I was pretty sure he was gonna beat me up, but after that, looked like hours of yelling, he released me. I ran like I have never ran before, straight to my brother's house, crying all the way. Story 18. Really bad turbulence at high altitude, and a lady yelled through the plane's intercom something I couldn't understand, and then kept repeating, "Brace, brace, brace." She kept doing so for a long time, and that plane shook in ways I didn't think possible. I and everyone awake at the moment about crapped our pants. To this day, I cannot experience turbulence without at least a minor degree of fear. A couple of very turbulent flights turned me into a horrible flyer. It sucks to be the person crying. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.